name is Sifuentes, and I'm Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate Academic Affairs, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event, Moving Forward, Defending Civil Liberties and Human Rights, a discussion with Margaret, Huang, Anthony Romero, Vince Warren, and it will be moderated by Professor Radhika Balakrishnan from the Women and Gender Studies Department. This event came about several months ago when Professor Balakrishnan called me and says, I have this great idea. That's always a cause for celebration or for trouble. But it has been a celebration, and it is a great event because it brought together many of us at this university who are concerned about human rights and the political scene at this moment. This event is hosted by the Center for Women's and Global Leadership, by the Office of Undergraduate Academic Affairs, Africana Studies, American Studies, Latino and Caribbean Studies, and Women and Gender Studies. I'd like to thank all of you for being here, but I also like to thank our wonderful staff, especially Karima Macaluso from UAA and Nicole Delara from the Center for Women's and Global Leadership for the organization of getting us all here and having this wonderful setting. I begin with an anecdote. Just a week ago, I was on the plane going to Mexico City. I was ready to take off, and of course there's always one last person, and we hate that dreaded moment. But this last person was a little child. The flight attendant walked in with her. By the way, I haven't told this story much, so I still get a little bit choked up by it. So there's an empty seat right behind where I'm sitting, and there walks in a 6-year-old child with the flight attendant. When the flight attendant came to the couple who was sitting in that seat behind me, he said to them, I hope you can take care of her. She's traveling alone. The woman wanted to know a little bit about the child and asked her in Spanish, ¿Cómo te llamas? What's your name? And the little girl answered in perfect English, my name is Stacy. She goes, oh, no hablas español, you don't speak Spanish. Just a little bit. My mommy speaks Spanish. And then the woman says, so where are you going? She goes, oh, I'm going to go to be with my mommy. She goes, oh, where is she? She goes, oh, she was picked up by the police 2 weeks ago, and my uncles are sending me over to see her. This was a very shocking moment because it reminded me that these are not the times we are all used to. And this child traveling home alone or traveling to a strange country alone, not speaking a word of Spanish, really reminded me about how the political scene has changed, how we are now faced with challenges of children traveling alone, people not knowing where their children are, and hoping that one day they'll be with them. So today's speakers have been champions for human rights, for civil rights. And it's really an emotional experience for us here at Rutgers to have Professor Balakrishnan lead a conversation about what are we supposed to expect in these next few years. And I don't want to take up much more time, but I tell that anecdote, I tell it to you, because I want us to think about what it means for each one of us to have to imagine children traveling alone. Professor Balakrishnan, will you introduce our speakers? And may I ask all of you to please welcome them to Rutgers.
Thank you very much. It's an incredible honor for me to be here. Not only because these are the leaders of the human rights movement in the country and in the world, but they also happen to be my very close friends. And so that's how I got them to agree to come together. So let me introduce them one at a time. I'll start with Margaret. Margaret is an advocate for human rights and racial justice, and for more than 2 decades. I've known her almost more than that, and is now the executive director of Amnesty International USA. Amnesty International, if you didn't know, is a global movement of people fighting injustice and promoting human rights. Before she started as the executive director, she was the chief of staff and the deputy executive director at Amnesty. She also was the executive director before joining Amnesty of Rights Working Group, a coalition of civil liberties and human rights groups formed after 9/11 to look at issues of immigration. She was also the director of the U.S. program at Global Rights and the program director of the Robert Kennedy Center for Human Rights and the program manager at the Asia Foundation, which is when I first met her in 1996 when we did a project together. Oops, sorry, we were children then. When we did a project on subcontractor workers in 5 countries in Asia, and we traveled around the world together. She served as a committee staff for the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. She has a Master's of International Affairs from Columbia University and a Bachelor's DSFS from Georgetown University. So, welcome. Next to Margaret is Anthony Romero, who is the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union, a defender of liberty and individual freedom in the world. He took the position as the director of ACLU 7 days before 9/11. And we actually were together in Durban at the World Conference Against Racism, and he flew back a week before I did and started September 4th. And then 9/11 happened. So you can imagine the change in his job description that happened soon afterwards. He's the 6th executive director, the first Latino openly gay man to serve in that capacity. He was named in 2005 25 most influential Hispanics in America. He's a graduate of Stanford University Law School and Princeton University Woodrow Wilson School of Public Policy and International Affairs. He also worked at the Ford Foundation, which is where we met. And that was even before her, but I'm not going to now put the dates on there because it's starting to tell you how old I am. And at the Ford Foundation, his last position there was the Director of Human Rights and International Cooperation before he went to the ACLU. And last but not least is Vince Warren, who's the Executive Director for the Center for Constitutional Rights, and he's been in that position since 2006. The Center for Constitutional Rights is dedicated to advancing and protecting the rights guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Founded in 1966 by attorneys who represented the civil rights movement in the South. In terms of Vince, I actually had the honor of serving on his board for 9 years and was a treasurer for 8.5 of those years. Prior to being at CCR, Vince was the national senior staff attorney with the ACLU, so this is all, we all know each other really well. Vince was involved in monitoring South Africa's historic Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings and worked as a criminal defense attorney at the Legal Aid Society in Brooklyn. And he's a graduate of Haverford College, and the most important thing, he's an alumni of Rutgers University. As we said, this is going to be a conversation, and so I'm going to ask our speakers a few questions. I have a few questions, but I think we're going to see where it goes. And since we're all friends, we can play it by ear. So I'm going to start with Margaret. In the current climate, can you tell us a little bit more about your campaign, The America I Believe In? And how do we build and lead the human rights movement in terms of what you were doing at Amnesty?
Thanks so much, Radhika. It's such a joy to be here with my friends as well. So you're all going to have to deal with a lot of mushiness up here as we congratulate each other and celebrate being together in the same space, which does not happen often enough. Amnesty launched the America I Believe In campaign last summer. And the reason we did is actually a rather silly reason. The reason we did is because we could not take positions on candidates in the election. And we were really frustrated by that. We don't have a C4 like some of our sister organizations. And as an international human rights organization, we have a very clear policy about impartiality that I cannot go anywhere close to. And so what it meant was outrageous things were being said on the campaign trail, and we would have to say things like, well, the policy that refers to would be really terrible if it ever came to happen, or something ridiculous like that. So we decided we needed to be more proactive than simply trying to dance around the terrible rhetoric. And we launched the America I Believe In campaign, which is actually something that we had done previously. It was a campaign that Amnesty tried about 15 years ago after 9/11. So we wanted to remind people what it is that we value about being American, about being in this country. And we wanted to remind people about the values that we should be lifting up during the campaign, rather than the ones we were hearing espoused at the time. And we asked our activists across the country to take pictures of themselves holding signs that said, "The America I believe in does what?" And we got great photos. They're on our website if you ever want to check them out. And it was our first effort to try to call people to activism around some of the hateful rhetoric which has now become policy in this new administration. So it's still going, and you can still go take your photo and post it on the website if you're interested. But I think the most important thing is to be thinking about what those values are. And we in the human rights movement here in the United States have to think about how we counter some of this rhetoric beyond just hating the individual who's doing it, which is very easy at this moment. We actually have to change the narrative around what kind of country we want to be. And it's a great starting point for us to be thinking about tonight, I think.
Thanks, Margaret. Vince, I'm going to come to you. There's, as Ben started us talking about immigration and the young child being sent to Mexico, CCR has done a lot of work on immigration policy. What can we learn from CCR and the Sanctuary movement that you've been a part of in our current climate?
Thank you, Radhika. It's great to be here. It's great to be back with my Rutgers family. The Center for Constitutional Rights has been around for 50 years, actually, and we were founded in 1966, as Professor Balakrishnan was telling you, focusing on working with movement groups in the South. And we do litigation and advocacy with movement groups. And we fight power. We fight the most egregious forms of power that we're seeing now, but we also build power with movement groups. And it's actually in the build power context that our immigration work has happened. So many years ago, in the 1980s, when there were a range of people who were fleeing violence in Central America and were coming to the U.S., Center for Constitutional Rights was active in forming the legal arm of the sanctuary movement back then. This is where police and other folks were looking to round up people who were leftists who would come to the United States and to deport them to the countries where they came from, where they would face beatings, death squads, and that kind of thing. So at some level, it's an immigration question, but it's also a human rights question. And one of the things about immigration that I think is was laid out, that's something that's embedded there that's important to remember, is that for every internal immigration problem, there is a foreign policy connected problem with it. So you can't think about, as Donald Trump and a lot of folks now do in the US, just think about immigration as, what are we going to do with these people that are here, let's get them out. The question is, why did they come here? What are they going back to? Why can't they be here? Is it a greater threat to their well-being to send them to a place that they don't know, to a place that's of danger? Is it better for us, in terms of our values, to be thinking about how we can keep them safe and to really make ourselves as a society more productive by incorporating and working with folks that are here? And so when 9/11 happened, CCR and other groups, and the ACLU and other groups were very involved in post 9/11 work. What we are seeing now, it's not a 9/11 problem that we're seeing, it's an 11/9 problem that we're seeing. On November 9th, Donald Trump was elected. When Donald Trump was elected, the ground changed in very much the same way that it changed on 9/11. But it's now, we're not facing external threats. We're facing internal threats to our democracy that are here. So the lessons that we've been learning primarily by working with social movements in the context of immigration are the following things. Number one, that the rhetoric of criminalization around communities is so deeply not just hurtful, but it's also very dangerous because it is essentially enabling and empowering a massive set of deportation mechanisms that are happening. This has happened in this country before, and if we're not vigilant, it's going to happen again. But the other thing that we're seeing that I think is really important is that in the criminalization narrative that's happening, it's not just the question of whether these are people that they wanted to point that have committed crimes. There was an executive order that came down. You probably didn't read this. I know you were reading the executive orders as they were coming out, and it was like a waterfall of executive orders. There was one on criminal justice, and I just want to highlight really quickly. And the criminal justice one was entitled, and I'm telling you this is the truth, it was entitled Reducing Rising Crime and Restoring our sense of public safety. Now, for those of you who are criminal justice majors here, you know that crime is not rising and has actually been declining since 1994. And so how can you reduce rising crime when it's actually not rising? How can you restore public safety when we are in a situation where we are more publicly safe than we have been in many, many decades? But the point relating to immigration is this. In one of the executive orders, the president authorized the attorney general to look at 3 rising crime rates and rising crime trends. One trend was international narco trafficking. The second crime trend was gun violence and violent crime. The third one was, quote unquote, illegal immigration. Think about this. Being undocumented now is essentially synonymous with a rising crime rate. Once you make those types of connections and you bring law enforcement to the question of undocumented people, that ratchet only goes in one particular way. So it's not just this question about plenary authority and presidential authority to determine what immigration law is. We are actually actively criminalizing undocumented people in this country.
Thanks, Vince. Anthony, you took out an ad in the New York Times the day after the elections, calling on the administration that you'll see them in court. I don't know if you all saw it. What are the main issues? I mean, actually, to be honest, every day I thought about these questions and what I'd asked, things would change. Yeah. And so I had to keep going up and saying, okay, what are the issues? So right now, at this moment, what are the things you're fighting in?
I'll have to check my Twitter feed. So first I want to also thank Radhika for inviting me here. I knew I was being hosted by a friend when I saw the flyer of a picture of me that was 10 years old because I had hair in it still. So I hope I have not fully disappointed you from what I actually look like. It's been a long 16 years in this job. And I'm just really thrilled that Radhika was able to bring us together. There's very few people, probably only one, who could bring Vince, Margaret, and me in one place. And even the conversations we were having before have meaningful personal impact, I think, for me, I speak for myself. So look, the election of Donald Trump, as Vince and Margaret and Radhika already framed for us, it really served as a turning point in American politics. This was a presidential candidate that many people didn't take seriously, and most people didn't take literally. And so when the election happened on November 9th, as Vince referenced, there were many in the establishment and many in our own organizations, including myself, who were surprised. I think the only thing that helped us get ready for that New York Times ad was the fact that we took him both literally and seriously. And so in June and July of the summer, we prepared a very wonky legal analysis of all of Donald Trump's promises as a candidate. We have a C4, so we are able to engage in much closer to the party and political line than some of our sister groups who only have a tax-exempt organization. It's one of the most frustrating things about nonprofits. And it really talks about the absence of true freedom of speech when you have important organizations who have something meaningful to say, and yet they're barred from saying it because the IRS code is written a certain way. There is something wrong with that picture. But we have a different vehicle that is supported with non-tax deductible gifts. That's where the card-carrying members, the dues-paying members, those of you in the audience, that's what supports that work. And we had walked through a whole analysis of Donald Trump on the stump. It was like not like a presidential election that we'd ever seen. You couldn't really download his platform. There was nothing to be found, right? So we literally had to find and hire an opposition research firm who tracked him on the stump, compiled all of his statements, categorized them, and then we had to make some form of analysis of the editorial line as best as we could understand it. There were moments when he fundamentally contradicted himself on the same day. You know, one day he'd be in a blue state, and he'd say, I believe in Planned Parenthood, and they're an important organization, and then in the evening he'd be in a red state, and he'd talk about Planned Parenthood in negative ways, and talk about being a pro-life president. And it just was, we had to scratch our heads in a number of instances to figure out what, in fact, he stood for. In some of them, it was pretty consistent. You know, the anti-immigrant rhetoric was consistent throughout. The anti-Muslim rhetoric was consistent throughout. His positions on abortion rights would flip-flop over the different stumps, but there was a more consistent anti-choice agenda. He's no friend of freedom of speech, except if it's his own speech. He talked about needing to open up the nation's libel laws, which was a harbinger of things to come, because there are no federal libel laws to open up. All the libel laws are at the state level, and the federal jurisprudence that governs it is the First Amendment. Kind of hard to open up the First Amendment. And we put out this analysis that was very wonky, very thick, you know, lots of footnotes written by a bunch of lawyers, not a picture in the report. And we issued it in July that 2 people read, me and my communications director. And luckily, when the election actually happened, I was able to get to the office and pulled out that report. And then literally, it's the only time in my 16 years that rallying cry, that throwing down the gauntlet was an ad that I drafted myself. I literally just channeled the report into the computer, walked it down to the communications department, just placed this at the New York Times. We need to rally the troops. Because everyone was in a state of shock and dismay, and you needed to give them a sense that someone had been, we all were paying attention, that we had a rallying cry, and that we would use the courts to fight the Trump administration. Now, I'll go quickly, and then we've outlined 5 major areas for us that are important for the ACLU. And we have both a broad agenda, but we are more narrow. The Center for Constitutional Rights is exquisite in the fact that it has a much broader mandate, and Amnesty International with its global mandate. We are more the domestic lane, if you will. So we focused on the rights of immigrants, the rights of women to access reproductive health services, freedom of speech and the First Amendment, LGBT rights, and civil rights, especially in the context of police accountability and voting rights. Those were the issues we targeted. And we talked about litigation being an important tool because, number one, so much of what the Trump administration was suggesting in their policies and now in their executive orders were so patently unconstitutional that we knew we would win. Some of these cases are novel. We've never seen a Muslim ban. We've seen bans based on national origins. We've seen the Chinese Exclusion Act. We've seen the targeting of individuals based on their race or ethnicity with the Japanese-American internment, but we've never seen a ban on a religious people of many countries, of billions of people. And look at who's populating our government. Our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, right? The country's highest ranking law enforcement official, you got that right. What is said literally, quote, and verbatim, memorize it. Islam is a toxic ideology, end quote. Not radical Islam, not Islamic fundamentalists, not Islamic terrorists, Islam. Followed by billions of people, now for over a millennia, that the entire religion and all the adherents are toxic, right? So how can we be surprised that this administration gives us a Muslim ban? And we knew that they would follow through on those promises, we suspected. And it became not so hard to challenge them in court. When you have the president himself, and Margaret will talk more about this, make these promises to ban the Muslims on the stump, and then the day he signs the executive order, he goes on Christian broadcast radio to talk about the need to protect the Christians from these Muslim countries. And when they carve out an exception for minority religions in the executive order, we did the happy dance at the ACLU because it's so patently unconstitutional, it's so fundamentally against the freedom of religion and the non-establishment clause that we're like, great, this is making our day. So we think litigation is key. The second thing that I would say about litigation is really important for the public to understand sometimes complicated, thorny, eyes-glazing issues. You know, good litigation, for those of you studying it, like lawyers like Vince and others, know this. It's about a narrative. There are the good guys. That's usually us. There are the bad guys. That is the Trump administration. There is a clash. There is a resolution. There's a denouement. And we live to fight another day. So it helps frame thorny, complicated policy issues in kind of an easy narrative that people can wrap their arms around. And third, litigation is really important for us right now because we need to rob the Trump administration of momentum. We need to stop them in their tracks. I've used many different metaphors and I've gotten criticism. I used the one, I don't know why, I feel rather bellicose these days. I've used the word carpet bomb. You know, we need to carpet bomb their agenda. So I've been trying to come up with a different one. You know, like throw sand in their machinery, gum up their cogs. You know, we need to rob them of momentum. And guess what? It's happening, right? So he signed the executive order on January 27th, the Muslim ban 1.0. Here we are, March, 22? They still haven't been able to implement it, right? They would file a second executive order. It's been stopping this. They haven't been able to do any part of the Muslim ban for 2 months. They haven't been able to implement other executive orders on religious refusals. They still haven't been able to get that far down the path of trying to undo the Affordable Care Act and to defund Planned Parenthood. You know, that ship of theirs is very much stuck in the water, and there are a couple people trying to paddle the ship into some momentum, and so far, so great. And so we have 14 lawsuits on the Muslim ban, right? That is purposeful. They're all very good. 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 would have been fine. 14 is fantastic, because the more we fight them and the more they have to fight us in 14 different fronts, there are 30 lawsuits nationwide, right? Brought by attorneys general, by mayors. Fantastic. Because as part of the resistance, what we have to do is we have to play for time. And we have to make sure we stop them, and we stall them, and we make it harder for them to do the next thing on their to-do list. And I'm sorry, please, go ahead.
You get more time.
No, I get all riled up. That's why I've lost the hair.
So I'm actually going to skip to you, Margaret, and I know that Amnesty is doing a bunch of work on the Muslim ban.
Well, we all are. So.
Actually, all of you are. So the legal, the courts, and then there's the organizing
that's
on the ground. So if you could talk about the work that Amnesty is doing on the Muslim ban. And I remember Margaret and I were together at the Women's March right after the elections, and we talked about it, and she said, what are we going to do if there's a Muslim ban? So tell us what we're going to do about if there's a Muslim ban.
Absolutely. So we don't do litigation at Amnesty. For those of you who might not know, I was just thinking about how long we've all been around. When you said CCR had been around for 55 years, Amnesty is, I think, well, the U.S. part of Amnesty, which I run, is 54 years, and the international Amnesty is almost 60. So we're all in competition for longevity. I know you guys, we're not going to ask you.
They're 100.
Yeah, I know. Amnesty's approach to human rights is we believe that an individual can make a difference on human rights. An individual case might be the way to mobilize a lot of people to care about something, and an individual activist can actually make a difference in one person's life. We have a lot of members of Amnesty around the country who campaign for the release for a prisoner of conscience in some other part of the world. And they write letters every month, and they call the prison and ask to talk to the prisoner, and they campaign until that person gets out. And I'm happy to say that last year we actually got more than 200 people out of prison around the world. And that means that we don't do litigation, we leave it to the experts over here. But what we do is we believe that we can get everyday individual people to stand up and fight back against things like the Muslim ban. So we've been trying to mobilize across the country people to do a few things. One of them is just to get the word out about how terrible that is. And one of our challenges is Amnesty members tend to follow very similar lines of the electoral map. We have a lot of people in blue places and not so many people in red places. So we've been trying to get our members to reach out to their friends, to their family members in red states, and to talk about what's wrong with this. And for our members who are in those places, we're trying to get them to speak out even more publicly, write letters to the editor, call their members of Congress. And the last part is the most important part, because for us, the strategy for countering Trump is not going to be in the courts, although we're delighted that it's going on in the courts. But for us, the strategy is going to be about building the backbone of Congress to actually perform its checks and balances on the executive branch to make sure that we hold them accountable. So that means we are doing tons of training across the country. Amnesty has local groups and student groups across the country, and we're doing training for them on how to get active in grassroots legislative advocacy. We have a new SMS text service that you can sign up for, and we'll send you background information and a click to call your representative in Congress and to tell them that you're opposed or supporting whatever piece of legislation is coming up. And we're trying to get more people regularly engaged in building relationships with their members of Congress. We've particularly targeted 12 members of Congress who happen to be moderate, Democrats and Republicans, in primarily purple and red states, who are up for re-election in 2 years. And we're particularly focusing on the Senate, which we think has the best chance of really providing a counter to the administration. So this is some of the strategy that we're bringing, but I'll share with you what I think is probably the biggest advantage that we at Amnesty have, is that our global membership has mobilized around this. Not only have we here in the US been horrified and activated and mobilized to take action, but my colleagues in more than 70 countries around the world have joined us in our crisis response to this ban. Amnesty just last fall launched a global campaign to promote refugee rights and to try to protect refugees around the world. And I'll be honest, this is a pretty low time for the whole movement. The US, believe it or not, was the most generous resettling country in the world. And now the US has plunged its numbers for resettlement, which were already too low to begin with. And we're looking at ramifications and rippling across the world as countries like Hungary and the UK have already closed their doors to more refugees coming in following the US lead. So our colleagues around the world know that this election of President Trump isn't just terrible for human rights here, but in fact is terrible for human rights in their countries too. And we actually did a global day of action when the Executive Order 2.0 came into effect, or not, it didn't come into effect, it was supposed to come into effect. And we had a global day of action that saw actions in more than 20 countries where people went and protested outside of US embassies, holding up signs saying no ban, no wall. So this is a critical moment, I think, for the human rights movement across the world, and there's no question that this particular executive order for us is really a priority. I think both the Muslim ban and the refugee ban have serious ramifications globally. And we're going to be meeting next week in Sri Lanka to start mapping out a global strategy for how we respond to this crisis.
Thank you, Margaret. Very, very exciting work. I wanted Vince to talk a little bit about, let me do, I just went to Boston on Sunday and I came back yesterday. And I fly a lot. For the first time, I was on the plane and there were these two very drunk white men in front of me. And they were, I don't know what they were saying, and they looked over at me and tried to talk to me, and I was afraid. And the kind of rise in white supremacist attack against people of color has just gotten so crazy that, yesterday, some guy came and killed an African American. He flew into Brooklyn and killed someone because he didn't like them. So other than the legal issues, the global issues, we also have this issue of white supremacy and sort of emboldened white supremacy in the US. And I know that CCR has been doing really, really cutting edge work on structural racism. And after Ferguson, that you sent all these lawyers down there. I know all of this because I was on the board. I want you to talk about that issue because I think that's another critical issue of our time.
I think I'm happy to do that. And, just to start off, though, touching on what Margaret and Anthony were saying, that there is an element to the Trump administration that is really like junior varsity leadership. I mean, like if you think like the Muslim ban situation was striking, not just in its scope, and we've never seen anything like this, but it was also striking in how childishly it was thought through.
Competence.
It really was. I mean, it's
Fantastic.
Exactly. I mean, it would bring down the grade curve in any of your classes. But just as an example, right? So that you have a Muslim ban that says people from Syria, you're not allowed to come in here. The way that ban was written, that a Syrian national who moved to Switzerland and then decided to come to the United States would not be able to come into the United States. But a Swiss national who moved to Syria during the time of the Civil War would be able to come into the United States. Now that's not keeping America safe, that's keeping America stupid, right? That's just kind of nuts. And the reason why I'm raising that is because it gets to this question of white supremacy. And it's not clear that we've ever confronted this question. What does one do when you have a narcissist in chief, white ethno-nationalist that is at the center of everything, and every cabinet member really wants to privatize everything about public function? Like, what does one do? And so, in another way to think about that, because we litigate as well, is to think in addition to how we're going to fight that power and put sand in the gears, but to think about how do we position ourselves as an organization between that kind of executive crazy and the people that are going to be suffering from it. And so the way to think about that is to start thinking about what is the effect of these policies on real people in addition to our values and in addition to the Constitution. So one of our endeavors in the Muslim ban context was we didn't file the 31st Muslim ban case. 30 was excellent. 31 would have been a little gauche. So what we did was we filed a complaint, an administrative complaint against the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol. Why did we do this? Because during the first Muslim ban, we know that people were caught in airports. Here's what was happening around the country. There was a woman that was trying to come in. She had a valid visa. Back then, the visas didn't really matter in the first Muslim ban. She was held at JFK for hours. She was not given water. She was told that she would not be allowed into the country unless President Donald Trump himself said she could come in. That was going to take 2 months. So if she wanted to get out of jail, she would have to sign away and rescind her visa status that had been given by the United States, and she would be repatriated. So she was actually sent back to Saudi Arabia, which she was not from. It was a country that she was visiting for research. This is what happened to her. Another guy was forcibly handcuffed and put back on a plane against his will. Again, another person who was a national from one of the banned countries, who had been in the United States, who had gone to another country for a business trip and was trying to come back in. Elderly Iranian couple were held in San Francisco International Airport for 18 hours. 18 hours. I think 7 or 8 of those hours were after the Muslim ban had been struck down. So the question is, what do we do in the courts? But the question is, what is this unleashing in terms of our executive branch and our government officials, that you have to be able to hold somebody accountable for the policies that this president is putting forward. So a complaint to the Customs and Border Patrol is one of those things that we are going to continue to see as a very important piece to deal with how real people are being treated as a result of these policies, even as we win them. And relating to white supremacy, that it is white supremacy, there are things that are foundational things in this United States. And one of them is our values of the Constitution and free speech. Another one is patriarchy, and another one is structural racism. These are all of these things formed together as part of how this country was created. And we've had debates for many hundreds of years about how that manifests. Is it reasonable? Are we thinking about this the right way? Are we being fair? But what we're seeing now is an unleashing and an unlocking of essentially, over the Obama years, of 8 years of a lot of people who have felt aggrieved and had to hold on to their white privilege and to pretend that it was not a thing and to have kind conversations. It is now being unleashed across the country. And it is not just a black-white thing. There are immigrants, undocumented people, or people that they think are undocumented, that are being beaten and killed. There are black people that are beaten and killed. There are women that are beaten and killed. There are Muslims that are being beaten and killed. There are Jews that are being beaten and killed. This is all happening in the last 50-some odd days. And so I think it would be a mistake for us, and I think that we're all here learned people that are really looking for the facts. It would be a mistake for any of us to say that Donald Trump is the cause of the structural problems that we have. But it is safe to say that for those of us that have been doing work on structural racism, on patriarchy, heteropatriarchy, that Donald Trump and this administration makes it imminently more difficult to even have that discussion and that dialogue. Anytime that we talk about keeping communities safe and keeping the police and law enforcement out of communities, the narrative comes back that these communities are essentially criminal. One thing I just want to say about criminalization, the criminalization breaks down into 3 particular types of narratives. Black people and Latino people as criminals, undocumented people as illegal, Muslim, South Asian, and Arab people as terrorists, right? We all know that. That's nothing new. But here's the danger of the government framing those things as opposed to right-wing radio. When the government calls you a criminal, when the government calls you an undocumented, an illegal person, or calls you a terrorist, government cannot abide having terrorists and criminals and illegals in their midst without law enforcement action. The reason why we have law enforcement action is to go after these people. So if you define entire communities as bastions of criminality, and you have an administration that is putting hundreds of millions of dollars, shifting them away from social services that communities need, and putting them into law enforcement under a rubric of keeping us all safe from these criminal populations, that we have to expect that these communities are going to continue to be under siege both by governmental forces, state, federal, local, and that the people who have been aggrieved, the people who have some screws loose, the people who subscribe to the idea that this is a white country and everybody else that's not white is either a visitor, a tourist, an interloper, or a burglar and has to leave. This is the type of thing that we have. This is the type of problem that we have here in the country.
Thank you, Vince. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to really open it up so that there's a conversation. One of the things that we at Rutgers are dealing with is this issue of undocumented students. What do we do in terms of protecting their rights to education, and also just the culture of fear that comes about for this.
Yeah.
And so, Anthony, I know that ACLU has done some work on this, and you have the Know Your Rights. I think all of you have the Know Your Rights. And I'm going to ask you, but you can also jump in.
So look, I think it's very important right now for students and for presidents and the administrators of universities to really be huddling about how we promote the best interests of our communities. And the leadership of Rutgers has been really terrific in terms of turning this into an important sanctuary campus, making sure that the students understand that the university stands with them, I think is critically important, and it really is a testament of leadership at times like this. It's really important. A First off is that this is a time to educate ourselves on our rights. And there's lots of material out there. I know it's on Vince's website, I know it's on Margaret's website, it's also on our website, it's in different languages. We have a whole bunch of know your rights brochures, what to do if you're stopped in a police encounter, what to do if the Customs and Border Protection agents come to your home. We should download them, send them, connect them, photocopy them, put them out on any other letterhead that you want to be a part of. No one owns this information, it's our information. So put it on your own letterhead and disseminate it broadly, because the most important thing is for people to be aware and knowledgeable. There are lots of other materials. We have a mobile justice app that walks you through what are your rights in different types of law enforcement encounters. And I think this is a time when there's fear. One way to counteract the fear is to prepare ourselves and to get ready. And I think that's an important part of what I think we ought to do. The second thing, there are some really great organizations that can begin to provide kind of a bulwark against the immigration raids and the dragnet searches that we are already seeing and that we can certainly anticipate even further. I mean, President Trump talks about deporting more than 3 million undocumented immigrants who have criminal backgrounds. To give you a size of the scale of which he's thinking about, he wants to do that within the first 6 months, a year of his administration. President Obama ramped up the detention deportation machinery, not because he was anti-immigrant, but President Obama did so, and I'm not excusing it, we were often very critical of him. But he did it as a way to try to get the quid pro quo for immigration reform. He thought the only way he can get a pathway to citizenship is if he showed himself to be tough on immigration enforcement. And then the Republicans left him at the altar, right? He ramped up the immigration enforcement issue, and they said no pathway to citizenship, all bets are off. And then it took the president a number of years to try to scale back that beast that they call Homeland Security, that they had ramped up. And he had deported, President Obama deported almost 2 million people in his 8 years. Donald Trump promises to deport almost double that number in 6 months or a year. So we're talking a massive deportation machinery that is underway, that's largely in the purview of the executive branch. And I think one of the important ways that we're going to fight it is through citizen action. There are some great efforts by other organizations. United We Dream is a fantastic organization that I really, in addition to being a member of CCR, being a member of Amnesty and joining the ACLU, check out United We Dream. It's the Dreamers organization. They have a what do you call those? An app, right? That you can download. And if you want to be interested, you can be part of the human resistance that when the raids are playing out in your neighborhoods, they will give you a text message, and then people can congregate, observe, document, block these raids. I think it's really important to do that. For people who are individually afraid, I think there are some great legal resources out there. The National Immigration Law Center does fantastic work, and they have a lot of materials. They have a hotline. The American Immigrant Lawyers Association, ACLU, is also one of the key places to turn to for direct information. Our organizations are not equipped to deal with hundreds of thousands or millions of cases of individuals who will be hamstrung. So we're trying to find a way to deal with larger numbers of people through Know Your Rights, through litigation, through campaigning. But there are materials out there. And I'll just close with this. I think, ultimately the immigration, detention, deportation issue is probably the biggest challenge we confront. The Muslim ban 1.0 or 2.0 was a piece of cake, comparatively, right? Because you had an executive order that just screamed racism and religious discrimination and unconstitutional doctrine, right? With the raids that we anticipate that we're beginning to see, it's going to be happening in very dispersed areas, harder to get the facts on the ground. You have to have lawyers and advocates and policy and people documenting those raids on the ground in real time. Taking the affidavits, showing the patterns in practice, jumping into the detention centers. And that is a massive effort. Just to give you a sense, and I'll close after this. We represent some of the leading organizations in the resistance to Donald Trump. And thank God for Amnesty, and thank God for CCR and the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, and there's another half a dozen I would list that I think are really essential to resistance. We are tiny compared to what we're up against, right? So to give you one example, we probably are the largest public interest law firm in America, right? Nonprofit public interest law firm. We have 300 litigators on payroll, right? Nationwide, 100 of them in the headquarters with me. And being the largest, compare us to the 11,291 lawyers who work for Jeff Sessions. Compare that to the 19,000 litigators on Donald Trump's payroll at the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Labor, Department of Justice. So we're talking, just looking at comparing us, 300 litigators to 11,000 lawyers at Jeff Sessions' Justice Department, 19,000 lawyers working for Donald Trump. So this is a time when we need to get smart, we need to get people engaged, we need to have you join these organizations. You have to be part of the resistance. You cannot leave it to the groups to do the work. We'll do our best. We are totally outgunned, outmanned. The odds are hard. They're going to get smarter. They were incompetent as they rolled out these early orders. They've gotten better. They're going to get better still. It's going to be harder for us to win. We don't expect them to continue to be this incompetent throughout the whole 4 years. So we're going to need all the help that we can muster, and I think that's where the students and the leadership of universities who can provide important responses is really critical. I'm not sure, Margaret, what would you add? This is really much your bailiwick.
No, I actually was going to add something a little more personal. I'm a mom, and we were talking about kids earlier. I have a 15-year-old daughter who's in high school, and we live in Arlington, Virginia. And we go to a public high school there, and a number of the students are undocumented. And it had always been known and never an issue, and had never even really been talked about by my daughter and her friends until 4 months ago. And I can tell you that this issue has really highlighted for me the questions around security and criminalization that Vince was talking about, because these kids, there's been a rash of incidences in the DC area around MS-13, which is a gang that has its origins in US prisons, who were deported back to El Salvador and brought their gang affiliations with them, and now have ties between El Salvador and the US. So MS-13 is actually growing in the DC region, and there's been a number of killings of young teenage girls in the last few weeks in DC. And some of my daughter's friends have been talking to gang members because they are concerned that they're going to be picked up and deported, and the message from the gangs is, we can protect you. And I'm terrified by this because the gangs cannot protect them. But it also is such a lure. These kids are terrified. And so we're seeing a dramatic increase in the criminalization of a community because they don't see alternatives, because the government is not someone to turn to for help. And it also raises questions about the larger community and how do we stand up. Even in sanctuary campuses and cities, there's a lot of other work that's going to need to be done to offer real alternatives to people who actually don't have a lot of good choices. So I wanted to toss it out. I think we could probably spend the whole night on these issues around documentation and criminalization, et cetera. But it's personally becoming a lot more relevant lately.
I think that's 100% right. And I think it poses this challenge, I think we all feel, between how do we act tactically and how do we act strategically. So can I just talk to you for just a second about tactically and strategically for a second? So if you knew your house was on fire right now, right, you're like, where's the cat? You're probably like, let me get that paper that's due tomorrow so it doesn't burn up. Let me get my roommate out, blah, 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 my passport. If you knew that your house was going to be on fire in a month, you're not thinking tactically like, where's my stuff and what am I going to do? You're thinking strategically. How do I prevent this from happening? Who's going to be my network in case something bad happens? And in these moments, in the 50 days of the Donald Trump onslaught, it has tested all of us in organizations, individually, with how we deal with those two questions. Being strategic feels like you're being inactive. Being super tactical feels like you're maybe missing some of the other pieces that are happening. So, you know, in this moment when we're thinking about undocumented folks, I would add a couple of other groups. Anthony's absolutely right that we don't do this alone, and we're here, we're really happy to be here, but there are thousands of organizations that can reach the ground and reach, I think, some of the things that you might be interested in very different ways than we can. Three organizations that we partner with that you should check out. One is Mi Gente, which is an organization that's based in Chicago. They really are around building young people bases around pushing these things back. The National Day Laborers Organizing Network in Los Angeles. We also work with the Immigration Defense Project, which has put out a fantastic RAIDS toolkit, what we're talking about. So you should check those things out. But here's the way that, you know, as we're thinking about this, that we can start thinking strategically, which we all are. You know, my organization, right after 9/11, represented the men in Guantanamo, and we, at that point, I think we had 3 or 4 lawyers. We had more lawyers in the organization, but 3 or more lawyers that were really dealing with all of the men in Guantanamo, which was a total of 779, and a bazillion government lawyers, like Anthony said. And our strategy was, how can we leverage the network of lawyers and other folks that we have to be able to show up bigger than we have the ability to be. So we actually, over a period of time, recruited 600 lawyers, mostly from very large private law firms, to represent the men in Guantanamo. Guantanamo is still open. As a matter of fact, you know, footnote, you should be expecting, President Obama hasn't put anybody in Guantanamo in the 8 years that he's been there. The numbers have been dwindling, there are very few left. You should expect Donald Trump to be thinking about putting people back in Guantanamo, which will be an enormous shot across the human rights bar. But one of the ways that we're thinking about being strategic in the RAIDS context, because Anthony, you're right, that this thing is going to hit and it's going to come raining down on people and in places that we can't all get to. So we're thinking about where are some of the more rural regions where people are. There are organizations called workers' centers, and worker centers will organize very often daily laborers and other folks around worker justice issues. So they're working at the plant, they need to get their it's wage and hour type advocacy and that kind of stuff. But they are the organizations, when those work raids happen and hundreds of people or 50 people get popped, they have been left scrambling trying to find local immigration lawyers to do this. And so if we think this is going to come down at the scale that we're expecting, one of the things that we're thinking about is how can we mobilize the private sector like law firms who we were successfully working with in Guantanamo, and then have an idea like, what if the law firms represented the worker centers and we trained them, and that when these raids happen, there actually is a big law firm firepower to be able to push back against the more illegal actions that these governments are going to do. And all of our organizations are really beginning to think very strategically about this. It's going to be a 4-year slog, and we frankly haven't seen the worst of it yet, and we need your energy and your enthusiasm. Don't get frustrated, but do get angry, and really think about what are the partnership opportunities with our organizations, with organizations that you're creating, with your networks, with your cohort, with your church, with your family. Those are really the important things that are going to sustain us, to put ourselves between the governments and the people that are going to be the most effective.
Thank you, Vince. I feel like I'm hogging my friends' time because I get to see them often. So what I would like to do is to open it up so that we can have a conversation and have you all ask questions to our esteemed panelists. I know we have mics around.
Why don't we see if we can hear you?
You get the mic because we're being recorded. So.
Okay, sorry. Breaking the rules here.
Remember, I'm in charge.
You're in charge.
Tell us your name too.
That's why I'm here.
Oh, I have to turn this off, I think. Okay, now try it.
Thank you. All right, so my question is...
Tell us your name, please.
Oh, yes, okay. My name is Nan. I am actually studying journalism and media studies right now. And so my question is, what role do you think that the media plays in terms of playing into shock factor rather than focusing on citizens and informing them about policy? And what do you think needs to change, and how does this change come about?
I think what I'll do is I'll take a few questions and then we can have you all respond.
My name is Shadi Tahvildarzadeh. I'm a professor of mathematics here, and I'm an Iranian immigrant. My question is, as you mentioned, the size of, and this is for you, Anthony, you're in this fight where you have 300 people on your side and 19,000 on the other side. What would it take in terms of resources, money, or whatever it is, to add 10,000 lawyers to your, not necessarily part of your organization, but as it was mentioned by Vince, in some kind of partnership with other law firms and so on?
Hi, my name is Bethany. I'm a junior and I'm a public health major. So my question is, in public health, we really believe that healthcare is a human right. So how do you incorporate, health-based initiatives, health-based approaches to human rights and civil liberties?
Okay, we'll take one more and then we'll.
Someone's remembering all these.
Yeah.
Media, numbers, healthcare.
Just one more and then you'll have another chance for another round.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a professor here at Rutgers. My concern, and I want to know if you guys have a plan of action for the Trump campaign and the administration is efficient off of fear and hate. What is the plan of action if there is a tragedy through an international entity? And how will you approach that?
So you want to start? Okay, you start.
Oh, okay. So there are a lot of questions here. I guess to answer the media, I'm only going to answer a couple. To answer the media question, it is true that the media that there are some aspects of the media that are doing a horrible job, but they didn't start doing a horrible job on January 20th. They were doing a horrible job way before. And it really started out with, I mean, not to get too wonky, but the FCC rules going back about how big Fox can build its empire, what constitutes news. We've been in, you all have grown up with the idea that journalism is more about opinion than it is about facts. Sorry to be the one to tell you, but it wasn't always that way. And so we're in the situation now where journalism is about opinion more than it is about fact, which is why it's very hard to get from almost any mainstream journalistic source factual information, not all. The other piece that I think is important is that the genius and tragedy of Donald Trump is, at this particular moment, is his ability to distract the media. Hey, look over here, there's a tweet. Hey, look over here, I'm saying something outrageous that's different from what the other person just said. And the media is sort of caught in the same question that we are. It's like, oh my God, he just said something that is factually not true. Who is going to be able to prove this? And we go into this idea of, did President Obama bug Donald? Of course, President Obama didn't bug Donald Trump, but we're consumed by that question. And I think part of the idea is that the mainstream media is going to have to learn some new rules because the rules have changed. Rule number one is they don't get access to everything. Rule number two, and incidentally enough, this is a prong of the emerging fascist state. When the government says don't believe anything that the media says, the media now is a little apoplectic. They're like, what do you mean don't believe what we say? They're figuring that stuff out. But I think they're going to have to realize that there are some flashy things that they're just not going to have to focus on and focus more on investigative journalists. That White House is leaking like a sieve right now. And that is a tremendous asset. They need to push harder for whistleblowers, which Barack Obama was terrible on, which Donald Trump is going to be even worse on, because that's how we're going to be able to get the information that's out there. The other question I wanted to ask, even though this wasn't for me about the cost of 10,000 lawyers, I want to throw something back at you. It is, we are tempted, perhaps in this day and age, to think about how can we maximize resources to NGOs in order to get the job done. I love maximizing resources to NGOs, and these three in particular, so please do. But it makes sense, but we might remember that we actually managed to end slavery without an army of lawyers. Women were seized the right to vote without an army of lawyers. We have done, what the civil rights movement was one, and it did have an army of lawyers, but it wasn't 10,000 lawyers. Every key thing that we've had in this country with respect to law, where the people have massively outnumbered the numbers of lawyers that are involved. Lawyers can do fantastic things, but we can only win what courts will allow us, and courts will only be brave and bold if they're pushed by public sentiment. And it doesn't always work in the short term, but it does work. So I think the question that I would ask back to the audience is, how many people is it going to take to defeat Donald Trump? That's really the question.
On the question on the media, the role of the media, I completely agree with Vince that we need to have a greater focus on investigative journalists and long-form media, which is harder and harder to find these days. At the same time, and we've gone through this debate, I don't think we can ever let up from challenging him on every single crazy tweet he puts out. Right? He is the President of the United States of America. And so I've been saying to my media team, which is often very hard, because we would literally get up at 6 a.m. and there will be a tweet from him. And we'll have phone calls from journalists asking us to comment. And I think part of my carpet bomb theory is to use the same vigor to respond to dog them, right? And he is the President of the United States. He does speak with the authority of the U.S. government. It is dwindling. I think once people see that he is contradicting himself and stating untruths and lies, that they will have greater difficulty believing him. I don't think this is a president that deserves the credibility or the legitimacy that he has been conferred with. And I think the sooner we erode his credibility and legitimacy, the sooner we can get on with running a democracy. So there's a part of me that I say, he'll tweet at 6 in the morning, we'll answer him at 6:05, right? And let's do it, we've got as much energy as he can. I completely agree with Vince's analysis about there is no way we ought to or can launch a response that's commensurate with the size of the U.S. federal government in terms of litigation. The power is with the people, right? And ironically, the one program that we have scaled up with, and it's a brand new experiment. I hope it's working out. I think so far so good. We literally called this thepeoplepower.org. It's a domain name that's part of the ACLU. It's populated by a lot of the Bernie Sanders people, since there are a lot of really good people who were planning to go into the administration that didn't have jobs, so we hired a bunch of them. And it's a whole way to encourage people to host local town halls and house parties, do resistance trainings, to meet with their local elected officials, to their sheriffs, to their local mayors and county executives. And so we, just last Saturday, launched 2,300 house parties where 210,000 of our members showed up for a resistance training. It was crazy. We've never done anything quite like this, all in one day at one time. People turned out. It turned out pretty well, all things considered. There was one event where, lamentably, a Trump supporter showed up to try to disrupt the party, and then the House party organizer called the cops on this person. And the cops didn't arrest the Trump supporter because we believe in freedom of speech. But that was the only thing that went off kilter. And I think it's all got to be about organizing people to take actions locally and to meet with the local elected officials, to require the universities that haven't done the sanctuary city the protection to do so, and the same thing with mayors and city council members. And I think you build the resistance up. And I think the thing I will also say is that there's a lot of things you could do if you don't want to be engaged in politics. And the best way to fight Trump's hate is to live our values. And there are ways to give a potluck for a refugee family. Call a local refugee center and volunteer. Go to a naturalization ceremony and hold up a sign outside that says, "Welcome, new citizen." Go to the local Muslim center and say, we love our Muslim brothers and sisters. I think a lot of that may be apolitical and may be more resonant with people who don't want to be mini activists or mini lobbyists, but it's a way for us to combat the hate with our values. I think the final things I'll say on the healthcare reform, on health and human rights, is totally about your issue. And when you really look at this kind of new bill that they're trying to repeal and replace Obamacare, they're talking about some massive changes to the healthcare system that bring us back to even where we were before Obamacare. You know, the lack of protections for pre-existing conditions, the lack of protections for people who are elderly or people with long-term long-term illnesses, the elimination of this prohibition against capping people from coverage. It's all about health and human rights. And so this is the health and human rights debate of our time. Finally, I think on the question on preparing for the next terrorist attack and what happens, I think this is where the American leadership, including President Obama, failed us. Because no one ever talked candidly with the American people about the inevitability of another terrorist attack. And San Bernardino would happen, and that was smaller than 9/11, but what if another 9/11-like event happens? And I think we have to remind the American people that we can keep ourselves free, but we can't keep ourselves fully safe, right? And that the inevitability of another attack has to be a response that inoculates us from giving ideologues the platform with which to pursue a very ideological agenda in the name of national security. And I think that's the conversation we need to be having, especially with the events in London of earlier today. It's to talk much more honestly about what it means when we confront another terrorist attack. I think the final thing, I'll just be really quick and quiet, is just that I'm encouraged. You know, I know it sounds very hard. I will tell you this. I know that all of our organizations have seen a real growth of support and a spurt of energy, and that gives us hope. My own organization, we had 400,000 members who were card-carrying members of the ACLU since before the election, and that number has now quadrupled to 1.6 million members. Honestly, I can take no credit for it. That's all Donald Trump's doing. Right? And that is phenomenal. And they are in every state of the union. And they are younger. And they are motivated. And they are engaged. And even in the Bush years, when we saw our membership go from 280,000 members, it doubled over 8 years. Here it's quadrupled in 4 months. There's something very different in the water this time around. And for the youngins in the room and the students in the room, you are living, I think, the apogee, the high point of activism, the likes of which an old man like me who's 52 years old hasn't seen. You had the growth of the Occupy movement, and you had the burst of energy and the incredible leadership from Black Lives Matter. And now you have these spontaneous protests of the women's marches and the immigrants' protests at the airports. Oh my God, that is so exciting. For an old dog like me, we haven't seen that in decades. And so this is your time. This is your time to lead. This is your time to demand the leadership. This is your time to kind of stake out the territory and the agenda. And God bless you for doing it, because it's finally come where I think there is the beginning of a very different moment politically that we haven't seen in decades. So.
I'll try to start by going backwards with the question. So on the question about the inevitable next terrorist attack, we actually have spent quite a bit of time thinking about it, and I think the focus for us has been on preparing our members to be responsive, because we will not have leadership responding in any positive way. And so the critical piece is going to be getting enough people power, responding with what our values are and how we understand how even some of the newest policies are contributing to the hatred around the world against our country. And so it is inevitable, I agree, and I think we're not going to be ready enough until it happens. But I do think the more that we can educate folks around our country to understand what's at stake, to understand what will happen following such an event, and how they can personally take action to help counter it is really going to be the best way that we can move forward. Right to health care. I think it's very interesting when Obamacare was being discussed, there were attempts of people to talk about a right to health care, and it really didn't go anywhere. There was no language around a right to health care when that bill finally went through. And we are in a very different moment. It is one thing to talk about a right that people don't enjoy, and a very different thing to talk about a right that you want to take away. And that's what's happening now. I saw an interesting analysis today that the Republican plan will actually cause more people to lose health care than if they just repealed Obama and didn't do anything. Wow. So when this hits, and it will, there will be another opportunity to really seize the narrative and to talk about what it means for this population of people, huge numbers of whom live in red states, and brought this onto the country with their votes. This is going to be another transition time. And I think the narrative around a right has a lot more meaning now than it did, when did Obamacare go through, 6 years ago? Yeah. So this is a moment. And for us to be talking as a country about the value of healthcare as a human right is such an important moment for us to be doing it. So very glad that you're pushing that forward. I'm going to skip numbers because they covered it. You guys did that well. But let's come to media. And I was just going to say, I was so surprised at the response to the German reporter this past week. Did you guys see about that? So when President Trump refused to shake Merkel's hand in their photo op, and there was a question from a German reporter, and she was applauded by all the American reporters for asking a question that none of them would have thought to ask. I know, it wasn't that brilliant. I mean, it was a pretty obvious question. Why are you doing things that make people around the world hate you? And, it was such an obvious question. So I was fascinated, and it made me think about, well, gosh, what are our media representatives doing if they're not asking pretty obvious questions like that? So there's no question there's a big rethink happening, and I think on the other hand, it's been a resurgence. I think people value media in ways that we didn't always appreciate even 6 months ago. So it's an opportunity for the field to reshape how it sees itself and the role that it wants to play as a fourth branch of government, or whatever appendage of government, to really have a meaningful role in the discussions that are going to go forward. So it's actually a really important time and a great time to be studying journalism.
I'm going to use my privilege as moderator to not ask a question but actually respond. I think the panel today, we've really looked at and focused on the impact in the United States. And the question about what if there's another terrorist act. I went the Friday after elections, I went to a conference in Argentina, and an international conference of human rights activists from around the world. And what they said is, who is paying attention to foreign policy? Because you have checks and balances domestically. Yeah. Foreign policy is crazy. And so it's not only like what's the reaction to a terrorist attack, what are the kind of foreign policy issues that are being put in place that makes everyone want to do that in the first place. And so I think we have to look at both the domestic issues, but we really do have to pay attention to what are the foreign policy issues that this administration is putting out. I mean, not just immigration, but going to Taiwan, and now his son-in-law is getting a deal in China, and what that means in terms of just the corruption of the family. But in terms of foreign policy, I didn't have time to ask the question, but now there are 3 airlines where you can't take laptops.
Flying on one of them this week.
And she's flying on one of them, and hopefully but that, and what's going to happen in Syria. The discussions in North Korea. I mean, so I think we have to pay attention to the domestic issues, but we really, really have to be vigilant and talk about the foreign policy issues, because the rest of the world is going to suffer. And that's what these activists said. What are you guys doing? What have you done to the rest of us? And so I think it's really important to do that.
We should take more questions.
I think we'll do one more round and then we'll call it.
We got a bunch. That's great.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth. I'm an editor at the University Press here, and my question is sort of about the distinction between strategic and tactical planning. I think that's a really valuable thing to think about, and I guess when I think about the next 4 years or the next 8 years, I wonder how we can plan strategically, to make that happen, and then sort of what is next. So this is a pivotal moment. I'm curious about just your strategies for how we move past it and make something different.
Hi, just want to thank you all for the answers that you've given. I've really enjoyed listening. My name is Jake. I'm also a junior studying public health. My question is about the culture of polarization that we have in the United States, because I think it's an issue that is not adequately being addressed, especially on college campuses. So when you see legitimized hate that's coming down from the top, and you know that the federal government is not going to protect you, that, as Finn said before, it empowers a lot of white supremacy and those sorts of issues. So how do you go about, like us as responsible citizens in daily life, combating that sort of polarization without it being seen as illegitimate, that, oh, you just live in a liberal bubble, or you don't know what you're talking about because you live in a blue state? So how do we have a productive discourse?
Take them all, yeah, I think we should get them all 5 or 6 and flip through them. Good luck.
My name is Frances O'Toole. I'm an immigrant. My question is regarding the Johnson Amendment. You touched on it.
Okay, go ahead.
My question is regarding the Johnson Amendment. You touched upon it a little earlier about the tax code that prevents nonprofits and church organizations from speaking on behalf of candidates and lobbying. So my question is regarding the Trump administration now talking to churches about having that repealed to give them a voice.
Yeah.
Obviously there'll be unintended consequences, because I also work for a nonprofit and I'd like the chance to be able to talk to the candidates that I would like to support. So if you could just give me your thoughts on, I guess, what the possible unintended consequences of that would be, and how it would backfire possibly, and whether the benefits would outweigh the negatives for nonprofits such as us.
Hi, my name is Shruti. I'm a senior at Rutgers University, and I'm an economics major. So my question is related to an article that I was reading the other day that said that the United States, specifically Donald Trump, is no longer the leader of the free world. Ironically, it's actually widely held that it's now Angela Merkel. I was wondering if you could talk more about that, the idea of the free world, and what it means or meant for us to lead it and how we don't anymore, and the future ramifications of this that we can expect nationwide and worldwide.
Are you sure you're not a philosophy major with that?
No. No.
I'm trying to go to law school.
There was, I think, someone else in that corner there. Yeah? Oh, yeah.
Hi, my name's Anne. I'm a graduate student here. My question is just about what institutions can do to fill the vacuum of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, and some of the work they were doing with police departments in their investigations into police misconduct. So I guess that's a sort of a practical question, what to do about that sort of vacuum in power now and kind of move forward.
Hi, my name is Brandon. I'm a student here. I'm studying history and sociology. What I'd like to ask is, while I very much appreciate the emphasis you put on the importance of individuals and individuals acting, it seems to me that when pure democracy has failed, the final bulwark of rights in this country has been the courts. And of course the ACLU has been a champion for those rights. My question is, should Donald Trump appoint multiple conservative justices, and the final arbiter of law in this country is now leaning towards his ideology, what recourse do organizations like yours have if litigation is no longer really a viable option?
Okay, that's the last one. Okay, let's try to organize that a bit. And I'm trying to be optimistic here. Look, on that last question first. Certainly we can expect a shift to the right on the appointments to not just the Supreme Court, but on the federal judiciary. And it is the inevitable part of the way that this democracy has worked. That Obama moved some of the courts a little bit to the left with his appointments, and we'll be moving back now to the right. I think what's different about the Supreme Court nomination is not necessarily the nomination of Neil Gorsuch, and he's not the one I would have selected for Supreme Court nominee. I think the real problem here is the original sin of Congress skipping over the nomination of Merrick Garland and dragging its feet for almost a year of when a sitting president didn't have his chance to have his nominee even have a hearing in the Senate. And they have so fully politicized this court that now let's see the pops on their houses, frankly. I'm waiting to see that happen. They may not fill this seat. They might fill it. If one of the other justices leaves or dies in office, God help us if it's one of our justices, then you will find this will really grind to a halt. And then I think that will be a disruptive moment to have a very different type of conversation. That if they don't filibuster now, they better filibuster on the second appointment, right? Because if we were to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, let's say, with a kind of a Roberts or Alito, you have lost the courts for all of your generation. So if they don't really hold the Alamo then we really need to have a very different conversation. Now there's a part of me that thinks we can still win, even in front of some conservative judges. Not all of them, but we have brought winning cases even when the courts were conservative. I mean, look, we won same-sex marriage equality, with a conservative Supreme Court. And that was because of very smart litigation that was really thinking about the clients, thinking about the venue. How do you split the circuits? How do you appeal to Kennedy? When we brought the case on, against the Defense of Marriage Act, and we picked an 80-plus-year-old wealthy white woman widow as our client, that was purposeful. We had many people who could have been our DOMA clients, but we picked a woman with a lot of money who was paying $400,000 in estate taxes because the government would not recognize her marriage to a woman. And we thought that little old lady who was hard of hearing and wealthy and a former IBM executive would be very convincing to an aging Supreme Court justice, right? Voila, right? We won it. So I still think I wouldn't give up the ghost. Some of this is so outrageous that even the Republican judges will have a hard time countenancing, frankly. I mean, the Muslim ban is an example. The judge out of Washington State in the Washington Attorney General's office was not a liberal or Democratic appointed judge. I think we can still win. We have to be smart. Quickly now, the other questions, some of which I forgot. I'll leave the strategic and tactical to you, Vince. I'm less strategic and more tactical these days. I'm trying to. I think we just have to be in it for the long haul. That's the biggest part of being strategic, is not being discouraged. We will lose some of these battles. We will lose some of these cases. There will be things that we won't like that they will be able to get done, and I don't think we can get dispirited and call it quits and go home. The most important thing is we play the long game, and we keep the pressure on. That's, I think, the most strategic I can think about it. The other quick questions, the question next to yes, and then Angela Merkel as the head of the free world. Look, I think that it's going to be very hard to build a Department of Justice in exile, right? None of us have the resources. We'll have to really cherry pick those cases. We will have to intervene in existing cases to make sure that they don't rescind their previous commitment to civil rights. And that's part of what we're doing. And it's a very kind of good relationship between the different groups of saying, okay, we'll take Wisconsin, you take Chicago, we'll take Ferguson, we'll do LA, really trying to divide up the work to have the maximum impact. But the idea that we can step in to fill the government void is really something that we have to be much more strategic and thoughtful about which ones we pick. The head of the free world, my vote is with Angela Merkel, frankly. So I mean, it's just like, I'm totally fine with her being the head of the free world. I think what's really depressing, and this is Margaret's world especially, is that, you know, the American government was what gave us the international human rights framework. It was the patrimony of Eleanor Roosevelt in the aftermath of that war. And the idea that we've now forsaken that leadership, it's something that we can rightfully be proud of, that was our gift to ourselves and to the world, is now in retrenchment, and that someone else has to be the standard bearer, just really should give us a great deal of cause, perhaps even shame. And I think part of having that conversation, that these are about the rights of everyone, and that it's not only about the folks who live in the US, but that we're talking about some global human rights that we have championed and that we now are so much on the cusp of walking away from and undercutting, I think is incredibly sad. You know, I'll close with this the question that, you know, where we end up. You know, it's hard to fully imagine how this all ends. You know, it's only been 4 months, right? 4.5 months, you know, since the election. It's been 2 months since he took office. You know, I bought a countdown. I don't normally shop for therapy, right? But I couldn't help myself. I went on Amazon and I bought a Trump countdown clock. For $18, you could get this little thing that's just like probably cost $1 to make in somewhere. And it's the only thing that's given me joy. I look at it every day. And I've been counting down. It's now 1,404 days, I think, today. And it gives you the minute and the seconds. It's like a death clock. And I just think we just have to find a little bit of joy. We have to find a little bit of hope. We have to live these values. We have to know that we are on the right side. That ultimately, I think that some of these issues, and this is where I do get really optimistic, and not to be so jokey, the idea that people turned out in massive protests on the executive order was massive change, right? So I started the week before 9/11, like Radhika said. I watched the mass deportation of Muslims in the aftermath of 9/11. I watched the country cower in fear and not ask the questions. I saw lily-livered Democrats vote for George Bush's policies, even great liberals. There was one senator who voted against the Patriot Act. Those were dark times, right? I remember having an argument that was heated with Senator Paul Wellstone, who voted for the Patriot Act and didn't understand why people were not asking these hard questions. What's different now, people turned out on the streets against a Muslim ban. Right? People were holding up those signs saying, Muslims welcome, we are all refugees, we're all immigrants. Oh my God, the idea that you had people turned out on behalf of a group that, 15 years ago, were being openly hunted by the FBI, where the FBI would go through the phone book, this is no lie, I lived this, and literally pull Muslim last names and visit them in their homes and deport them. Where you had employers who refused to stand up for their Muslim employees. Where Radhika and I first worked and first met together, there was a lovely Muslim guy who worked in the audiovisual department. And when he was picked up and almost summarily deported because he happened to have a Muslim last name, his employer did nothing for him. Right? This is different. You know, the fact that the people are turning out and they say, we are Muslims, we are immigrants, we are better than this, these are our values. I take hope. I think there's a lot to work with. And I think we don't work with what we've got, then shame on us, frankly. So thank you very, very much. I'll leave it at that. Then Margaret and Vince will definitely have more to say that's more specific to the questions, but I forgot them.
On polarization,
Oh yeah.
I was really struck by a story I read about a very conservative community. I think it was in Iowa, where a man who'd run a restaurant for years and years and years was picked up by ICE on a very old deportation order and is being held and is supposed to be deported sometime in the next week. And he's been living in his community. He's married a U.S. citizen. He has children who are U.S. citizens. He's been in the community for 20 years. And the community is outraged. And people from church, from the local chamber of commerce, from across this very small town in Iowa, is it Iowa?
Yeah, yeah.
Got together to say, why on earth would you deport somebody who's such a bedrock of our community? And what struck me there is this wasn't political. This was because they knew this guy, right? And they really had admiration for him and respect for him. And I actually think that that's the key to addressing the polarization. If we can't find ways to talk across the political spectrum and to know people who have very different views from us and be able to talk to them about these issues, then we're going to be in big trouble. But I think that's the key. And maybe on a campus, you might have a lot of people who you think like you, but there are definitely people here who don't think like you. And the question is, how do you build some conversations with them? How do you reach out and talk to those people? Maybe not the white supremacists, but maybe other people who actually did vote for Trump and who have felt alienated by our system for a very long time. So that's not necessarily an organizational challenge, but it's definitely a societal challenge that we're all going to have to work on. Angela Merkel, absolutely, I'm with you. She's got our votes. I'll just note that in the last couple of weeks, a few big things have happened. We've seen the executive order, one of the many that are coming soon that have been vetted by agencies, that will defund the United Nations by 40%, which is going to devastate the UN. And the UN is actually really, really terrified. The agencies that are most likely to be hit are the refugee agency, the human rights system, the things that we care very much about, UNFPA. So this is going to be a big hit when it comes, and we don't have enough champions in Congress that I'm persuaded that we're going to win to get the funding back. The other thing that happened in the last week is that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights held a hearing on human rights problems in the U.S. caused by these early executive orders of the Trump administration. And the U.S. government, which was the star witness for this hearing, didn't show up. It's actually the first time that the U.S. government just bailed and didn't participate in this international mechanism. So it's a signal about the importance with which this administration views the United Nations, the Inter-American system, the human rights system writ large, and it's a pretty big signal to us about what we can expect. And what that means is that we have to start thinking about new international strategies for human rights. For a really long time, we've been lazy. We've gone to the US government and said, stand up with us for LGBT rights around the world, be the champion. And sometimes they have, not always great, but certainly on LGBT rights, they've been a champion in the global community. We're not going to be able to ask the US government to stand up for us anymore. They won't do it. They probably won't be there. They're already talking about stepping down from the UN Human Rights Council. So we have to identify other countries who will take the lead, whether it's Germany, whether it's other countries in Europe, but frankly, whether it's other powers who are eager to step into a leadership role. I can't wait to have conversations with the Chinese ambassador about the role they could play on human rights. But these are the kinds of conversations that we're going to be having because we have a vacuum of leadership in the international level, for sure. Last comment in response on police accountability and police use of lethal force. Amnesty did a report a couple of years ago after Ferguson. We sent a human rights observer delegation to Ferguson to try to monitor police and protester interactions and document what was happening. It's the first time we've done that domestically. We send observers all over the world all the time. We've never done it in the United States. And one of the things we realized is that the state law in Missouri actually allows police to shoot somebody who's running away from them. They don't have to be a convicted criminal. They don't have to be an escapee. You could just have an encounter with a police officer and run away, and they could shoot you, and that's completely legal under the Missouri state law. So we thought, well, that has to be like the worst law in the country, right? I mean, who's ever heard of anything that terrible? So we decided we better take a look, and we looked at all 50 states and the District of Columbia, and we discovered that not a single state comes anywhere close to the international standards on when police can use lethal force. In fact, 9 states allow police to shoot to dispel a riot. And for anybody who's participated in a protest, recently it has been called a rioter, you know the alarm that causes all of us, right? So there's no question that a lot of work has to be done on this issue, and we cannot rely on the Department of Justice. So the fight is going to shift to states. And I'll share with you, we've been campaigning now in 5 or 6 states. We've seen progress in Maryland and Washington State to try to change the state laws to actually create accountability for state police agencies. And that's a place where universities and activists can actually see progress made in the next 4 years. It doesn't have to be at the federal level. You can make a lot of progress at the state level. And happy to talk more after. Thank you all for having us.
So one of the real advantages to being a small, scrappy outsider organization is that eventually stuff goes really bad in the middle, and then everybody comes and joins you. So when we had been outside essentially throwing legal and advocacy rocks at just about every presidential administration since our founding, going back to Richard Nixon. And it hasn't been just because we like doing that, although it is kind of fun. It's mostly because our focus has been really how do we begin to dismantle those elements of presidential power that are problematic, regardless of who the president is. So when George Bush was the president, we were out there calling him all kinds of names, suing him all the time for all manner of abuses. President Barack Obama came in, we sued him too. A lot of people were like, well, why are you suing BHO? The guy is awesome. And he's like, yeah, he's awesome. But think about what Anthony was talking to you about, as when he was the reporter-in-chief, the mechanism by which and the power by which Donald Trump can take that and ratchet it up has been set. So at some level, as we're coming to this discussion now, it's important to remember that there's actually a long trajectory of how we got here. And there's some lessons in there for, I think, some of the questions that we have. And Angela Merkel and the leader of the free world. I'm going to focus less on Angela, and I'm going to focus more on the free world. The free world notion is an anachronism, in my view. The idea that it's a Cold War idea that there are people that are free and there are people that are not free. It's actually what we're in is a free market world. And I think Angela Merkel is the leader of the free market world, and I actually think that Donald Trump wants to be the leader of the free market world. And why am I talking about it in that way? Because the idea, getting back to the question of the cabinet is really arrayed around the idea of corporate benefits, and it's arrayed around the idea of reducing the budgetary costs of the services that we need by sending those things out to private contractors. So essentially we're contracting away our government situation. So when we sued the Blackwater Corporation who was a contractor with the State Department for killing people in New Source Square, we had a really interesting problem legally, which was the State Department contracted with Blackwater. We sued the State Department for the illegal killing that Blackwater did, extrajudicial killing. The State Department said, hey, they're a contractor. You need to talk to them. Talk to the Blackwater people, we bring them into the lawsuit, and they say, hey, we're a contractor, we're just following state policy. You see how this thing works? And if the question really is about how we're going to be holding people accountable, even for the positive things that they might do for us as opposed to the horrible negative things, thinking about it through a corporate lens is a real problem. Which takes us to this question of polarization. So maybe some of the things that I've just said, people say, well, I understand what civil liberties are and rights are, but why are we talking about the economy as well? Well, the important piece about our polarized society, and we are absolutely polarized in our discussions, is that I think we've gotten used to having easier conversations, and we don't know what to do with hard conversations. And so there are impossible conversations that you should never, ever have. I'm not going to talk to, there are things that I didn't talk to my mother about because I was like, no, I'm not going to go there. There are things that I don't talk to other folks about, but we shouldn't be afraid of the difficult conversations. And what we're engaged in now is this question of having these difficult conversations. And at some level, if we are more concerned with how we are branded as living in a liberal bubble, or apparently I've been called, my trollers call me a snowflake on Twitter, which I find highly ironic given my skin tone, but I'm like, okay, it's a bad thing, apparently. But you know, being a sort of a delicate liberal living in a bubble as some sort of mechanism of counteracting what you think is wrong. This is actually not an old trick. Back when I was in college, that's when people actually started talking about politically correct. I was shocked and surprised to see that Donald Trump is talking about it again. He's old like Anthony, so that's why it's coming up. But these are old pieces that are coming back, and the idea is don't get destabilized by the rhetoric that tries to marginalize your values, because we actually have core center values. We've been for 50 years, ever since Richard Nixon, trying to move through a corporate and criminal narrative back into a values-based thing that we actually care about people. And for the Republicans and other folks, it's about money, it's about cost, it's about crime. These are important values for us to reclaim, so don't be afraid of that difficult conversation. The Department of Justice, you know, again, I'm speaking as an outsider, we've done a number of lawsuits, and as a matter of legal strategy, it's actually not great when you're filing a lawsuit when the Department of Justice wants to jump into your lawsuit. So even under progressive or democratic regimes, they tend to screw it up. So we filed when we won the stop and frisk case in New York in 2013, we actually asked the Department of Justice not to intervene in that case. We ended long-term solitary confinement in California in Pelican Bay Prison, where the most people in the country were being held in solitary confinement. We asked the Department of Justice not to intervene in those cases. And mostly because you can frame those cases without government intervention in really interesting and I think important ways. And so the other piece about being the outsider is that it is true that there are some cases where you can put forward the most sympathetic plaintiff. Like, who could possibly rule against this woman? There are cases when you can't. If you represent Guantanamo detainees, prisoners, people accused of stop and frisk, all manner of folks like that, you don't have a whole lot of choices. And when you think about it politically, if we were to take those cases and start separating the good Muslims from the bad ones, the good people that are accused of crimes from the bad people that are accused of crimes, then we start playing into the Donald Trump narrative, right? We only want to get rid of the bad ones, we don't want to get rid of the good ones. So at some level you have to take a risk, which goes to the conservatives and the Supreme Court. The risk that we're taking is that sometimes you take these cases and you just lose them. And we have a saying at CCR, and I actually require all of the staff, Radhika will verify this because she was on my board, I require all of the staff to get the following tattoo, which says, success without victory. And what that means is it is possible to take these cases that actually lose, but you end up getting tremendous success out of them in terms of the fourth branch of government, which are the people. So the ACLU, Anthony and I partnered on this fantastic case in 2010 when we were challenging President Obama's drone program. President Obama, Leon Panetta came out with something in the New York Times and said, hey, we have a kill list of people that were going to kill by drones. One of the people was a US citizen, a man by the name of Anwar al-Awlaki, who said really horrible, terrible things. He was a US citizen. We were thinking about this, we're like, yeah, you really can't go around putting out a kill list saying that we're going to do extrajudicial killing of American citizens. So we filed the lawsuit together. It was one of the first cases that the ACLU and CCR worked on together in many, many decades. We lost the case. But what we were trying to get the legal justification for using drones in an international context, because there was no transparency about that. We lost the case, the judge dismissed the case, we decided not to appeal the case, but here's what happened afterwards. No one was talking about drones before 2010, and after this litigation, everybody was talking about it. And in fact, whistleblowers within the Department of Justice leaked the document that the court said that we didn't have a right to see because we lost on a bunch of technicalities, released the document, and it became part of the public discussion. So even though we lost that case, there was tremendous social value to what it generated. And so part of the question with the conservative courts are that you are going to win some because conservative courts don't like the crazy any more than liberal judges do. When Donald Trump says things like, the courts cannot look behind our rationale for this type of thing, you never say that to a judge. That's like saying to your mom, don't look in my room. She's going to look in the room. So there are real values, there's real value there, and I think that we'll be able to move it forward in that way. And the last thing that I want to say, I guess, to close, relates to a couple of the questions around strategy, around being individuals, around what do you do around the next terrorist attack. And so let me just sort of lay out this piece. It is hard to imagine moving forward what we are going to do because it's also hard to imagine what's going to happen. And a lot of what we're going to do is, there's context about how other people feel about it. We might be in reaction, we might be in solidarity with it. But let me sort of throw this out. Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood has been around for a very long time. Every Planned Parenthood has figured into their strategy what to do if Planned Parenthood is attacked. So their idea of their work is that we are not going to let crazy people and people that want to harm us push us off our mission. And so the question for us is why is that such a big discussion in society, even in the science of these horrible things? When the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Martin Luther King were in the South on their campaigns, and they were in the churches, and they could hear the cars pulling up with all of these white people, and they had baseball bats and they had clubs. You know what they did? They started singing. And why are they singing? They were singing because singing makes people less afraid. And the idea of courage is actually not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward despite the fear. And so I think the question for us is, as we think about how that terrorist attack is going to change the paradigm, and it will, the question is, are we going to get knocked off our courage, and we're going to get knocked off our vision? And we shouldn't. And the last thing I want to say is this question of risk, which I've been thinking a lot about, which is, we are organizations, and well, not these organizations, but a lot of people and a lot of organizations can be very risk averse. It's a smart thing to do. It's a cost-benefit analysis. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. You know, when bad things happen, these organizations move into action. Organizations think, how should we feel about this, right? But taking a risk is a necessary component of social change. There is no person that has ever escaped from slavery any place in the world without taking a risk. People have come over this border and back, and in other places, it's always taking a risk. Every young girl that walks, every woman that walks out of the house wearing a hijab at any place in this country to do whatever it is that she needs to do is taking a massive risk, a massive risk. So they don't have plans, they don't have strategies, they have to live their lives. And so we should be really thinking about how are we supporting the people that are taking the very biggest risks in this society under this president that essentially criminalize their existence. That's how we should be thinking about it.
Amen.
I want to thank all three of you, Margaret, Anthony, and Vince, for taking the time to come and share your thoughts with us. Other than all of us mobilizing, the fact that the three of you are heading up these really important organizations makes me feel much better. And as all of them have said, I think it's all up to us to mobilize. And I hope they've given you inspiration to mobilize if you haven't been mobilizing already. Let's give them a round of applause.